Well, hi, I'm Larry Totzke, and this is View from the Pew. And I'm here today with my good friend Louise Anderson. We're really glad to have you with me today, Louise. You do so many different things around Oak Hills Church, and I understand that that comes from your serving for many years with Wycliffe Bible translators in Africa. So thanks for being here today, and why don't we just get started by your telling us a little bit about your work in Africa and how it has impacted you.
Thank you, Larry. It's good to be here with you today. My work in Africa actually began 50 years ago when I went to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia to teach third grade for the missionary kids, mostly missionary kids, at Good Shepherd School. The school functioned for 17 years from 1960 to 1977, and then it had to close because of the communist rule in Ethiopia at that time. But I'm still in touch with a handful of my students, people that I had in third grade, and now they're in their 50s. It's kind of amazing to think of that. But it was a life-changing experience for me and prepared me for another mission experience later on. When I came home from Ethiopia in 1973, I was hired at Bellevue Christian School in the suburb of Seattle to teach. First year I was teaching a third and fourth grade class, and then the next years I taught fourth grade for 3 more years. And it was between the third and fourth year of teaching fourth grade there that I met Jim at a conference in Colorado Springs, at a Navigator conference. And then, so I taught 1 more year, and we were married after school was out. My fourth grade class sang in our wedding at First Presbyterian Church in Bellevue.
Wow.
That was fun.
That is fun, yeah.
So then, after Jim and I had been married for 7 years, when the economy fell apart then, some people who are old enough remember the high interest rates in the early 1980s. His business closed, and the Lord led us into Wycliffe Bible translators. We went to Dallas for 1.5 years, and then we were assigned to go to Kenya, which I was really thrilled about. Jim wasn't sure about what on earth he was getting into, but anyway, he was ready for an adventure. And after we'd been in Kenya for a full year, he thought, I think this will work fine. This is my new career now. And so then we sold our house in Grand Junction, Colorado, where we were living, and continued serving with Wycliffe. A midlife career change for us.
Yeah. So I think I'm going to see if I can get Jim to come and visit with me one of these views from the pews. But I want to focus on you. What was your role, or one of your roles anyways, during your time in Kenya for Wycliffe?
Okay, well, one of the roles that I remember a lot was serving as a librarian. When we first got there, this one lady who was a linguist, she had several boxes of books, cardboard boxes full of books, under her desk. And when she heard that I had had 1 course in librarianship, she said, oh, I know what we can have you do. How about you put all these books together, organize them into a library for the translators, or the translation teams over in Congo, not in Kenya, the ones in Congo. So I said, all right, well, give it a try, and that's what I'll do. And it was kind of funny because I was given a table in the library upstairs, in the Bible translation library for the translators in Kenya. I was given a table and a typewriter adjacent to the table, and all these boxes of books. So, okay, I figured out what their Dewey Decimal number should be. Thankfully, a lot of books have a Dewey Decimal number on the back of the title page already. And there was the BTL library, Bible Translation and Literacy Library, was already pretty well full. There was no place for me to put these books except in a closet. So somebody had made shelves in a closet, and I filled it with the books for translators in Congo and called myself a closet librarian.
Closet librarian. I think that's cool. But you, as a librarian, what was the role of these books? Did the translators, they didn't come from the Congo to Kenya to get their books, did they? How did that all work?
Well, they used the books when they were in Nairobi, and eventually the books were actually shipped over to Congo. The whole library was, after I handled that library for 7 years, and then They eventually boxed it up and shipped it over on MAF, I think. And then at the end of our time in Kenya, it's probably the last 2 years we were there, the Bible translation and literacy, the Kenyan library had been unattended. No one had been doing the work of the librarian for 2 years. And there was a Kenyan lady who needed a new assignment within the organization. Anna is her name. And so I said, Anna, listen, how about you be the librarian and I will teach you everything I know about being a librarian, which was
your one course.
For my one course, that's right. So she learned a lot, and she did take one course in town herself. And I took her around to other libraries too, to see what they looked like. We visited probably at least 4 different libraries, one of them being Library of Congress. You probably didn't know this, that the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. has a branch in Nairobi.
Wow, I did not know that. You're right.
They do. And right now it's located within the embassy in Kenya, but before it used to be in another office, just a floor of an office building downtown. And that was interesting too. We took them a few books from BTL. It was considered part of the diplomatic service. The Library of Congress was just a department of that.
I see. Yeah. I don't know if all of our people know much about Wycliffe Bible translators, but can you, in like 25 words or less, I think that might be a little bit hard, but tell us what Wycliffe does and why they're so valuable to the whole goal of reaching the nations with the gospel.
Wycliffe's goal is to make God's Word, the Bible, available in every language that doesn't already have it, to at least get a project started by 2025. And so many people around the world in these more remote areas, they've had very little education, or not a whole lot of education. And for them to read the Bible in a trade language, or else in a European language like English or French or Portuguese, they miss a lot of the meaning because it's not in their mother tongue. And it's always interesting I remember one man from Congo was studying in Nairobi to be a translator, and he had been working on the book of Luke, and he stood by my desk one day and he said, "The words of Jesus are so sweet in my mother tongue." And it was really a blessing to hear him say that.
Yeah. To be able to read the Bible in your own tongue is so good. I mean, I know, my mother tongue is English. It's the only language I know. But to have grown up trying to read it in the King James English was so difficult, and yet that was still English.
Yes.
Now that we have more modern translations and we remove the these and thous and all the other old English words, it's so much easier to understand. But to try to have to read it in a trade language like French, when your mother tongue is a tribal language that's nowhere near French, would be so difficult. So the work of Wycliffe is really, really important. And I've always admired what Wycliffe translators do. It's pretty technical, isn't it?
It is pretty technical. And in this library, there were books about the Bible, the 200s, and then there are books about linguistics, and also translation, and also culture. In the 200s, 300s, and 400s, those are where, that's what fills up a translation library.
Yeah.
I guess you realize Jim and I were not Bible translators ourselves.
I knew that, right, yeah.
We were doing the support work behind the scenes so that the translators could stick with the task.
Right.
In their...
And every organization needs workers behind the scene.
Right.
Whatever kind of an organization it is. So your work was still very, very valuable to help the translators do what they needed to do.
Yeah.
You were telling me a little bit earlier that while you were in Nairobi, you had an experience with a woman who I think was a cleaning lady, and you shared that with me. I think it'd be good to share that with our viewers today.
Okay. Well, I was telling you about Agnes. Now, one day I was outside the gate of the compound where we lived, waiting for the bus to come along. That is our office bus to pick me up to go out to our office, which was a couple of miles away. And I saw Agnes get off her bus over on the other side of the railroad tracks. She crossed the railroad, and then she stopped to talk with these men who were making their morning tea. They had a little fire and a pot of water going to make tea for themselves for their breakfast, just out there in the open air. And I knew these men were disreputable people. They would be happy to attack somebody, to steal everything they could, strip them of their clothes, take their shoes and socks and everything they could, whatever money they could find on them, because they were unemployed themselves. And Agnes stopped and chatted with them, and then came on across through the bean field, and I talked to her as she came to our gate, and I said, Agnes, I'm surprised that you talked to those men over there. Oh, Louisa, don't you know, she said, we are all children of God. Those men are children of God, just like you and me. I thought, wow, that was really impressive to learn something from the cleaning lady like that.
Yeah.
How valuable God's people are.
Yeah, it really is, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah. And that kind of leads me to think about the passage of Scripture that Pastor Jeremy preached about last Sunday. It was the Beatitudes, the 9 statements that Jesus made in a sermon that's become the most important sermon ever preached, a lot of people say. And I just want to read the first 4 of these Beatitudes because I think they lead us into another story that's really important for us to talk about. But in Matthew chapter 5, starting in verse 1, it says, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up to the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak, and he taught them, saying, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. And blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. And I don't know that the men that Agnes was talking to were necessarily hungering and thirsting for righteousness. But when I think about these Beatitudes, Jesus isn't talking about the movers and shakers of our community. He's talking about people who have struggles, people who we may not think of as the ones that we would go to and connect with. And yet that's what he was, in the rest of his message, suggesting that we do. And again, you told me a story earlier about when you were teaching school here in the States that reminded you of these Beatitudes, or the Beatitudes reminded you of the story, whichever. How about telling us that story? Okay,
I was especially struck by Pastor Jeremy's line where he was telling us that in these Beatitudes, they give us something to think about when we can decide who is worth our time or who is not worth our time. And that's part of what made me think about Agnes. Those men over there, homeless men, were worth her time to stop and greet them and to speak to them politely.
Yeah.
But also, I was reminded of the second chance principle that I learned from the principal of the school where I was teaching in Bellevue. It was my first year there. I was teaching a combination class, 3rd and 4th grade, and I heard when we got back after Christmas that a new student was going to come to my class. Well, he wasn't new. He had been at the school probably for kindergarten through 3rd grade, and then his family took him back to the public schools and decided, well, maybe they should stay at the Christian school after all. And this boy had kind of a reputation for, I didn't know what exactly, but he had some kind of a reputation that made people kind of roll their eyes a little bit about Chris. And so I decided I better ask the principal about him and, you know, to be prepared for when he came to my class the 3rd week, 4th week of January when the new semester started. And so Mr. Bonner said to me, listen, I'm not going to tell you a thing about that boy. All of us need a second chance in life one time or another. You give this boy a second chance as a student here at our school and just see what happens. And so I thought, you know, in retrospect, for as long as I've lived, that to me, that is the second chance principle, that we don't need to know all the details about somebody's background or how they have behaved or what kind of trouble they've been in. Just take them as they are, the way. And I didn't have any trouble with that boy. I enjoyed having him in my class. And at the end of the school year, he gave me this cup right here. You can he said, "Oh, Miss Blazing, I don't know if you like this cup or not, but anyway, my mom said I should give you this for a present at the end of the school year. So here it is. Well, this is my second chance cup now,
Wow.
and I always remember Chris being in my class for the second semester of fourth grade, and it's a lifelong principle for me to afford a second chance to other people that I learned from the principal of the school.
I think that's a really, really important concept for us to understand. You know, and we hear the Beatitudes and we hear Jesus basically saying, I will give everybody a second chance.
Yes.
You know, and I want you, disciples, to give the people that you minister to a second chance. And that then teaching comes down to us in the church today.
Yes.
We need to be willing to give people a second chance.
Right.
People who maybe we know did something that wasn't so good, and we know that Jesus forgives those people.
Yes.
We need to, even if they didn't sin against us, we need to forgive them and give them a second chance.
Right.
I really like the idea that you have that cup, and you're able to remind yourself
Right.
for these many years since you taught that young boy in school that the second chance principle is pretty important.
It prevails, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as we think about this passage, think about what we're studying in the book of Matthew, is there anything else that you'd like to talk about today?
Well, I guess there isn't anything else in particular that I'd like to talk about. Let me mention one thing that Liz said last week, just following up on what she said. I remember at the end of her conversation with you, she talked about 2 Timothy 1:7 about God does not give us fear. And there's really, these days, there's quite a bit to be afraid of if we let ourselves be occupied or preoccupied with what's going on in the world. But this is a verse that was really significant to me in Kenya also, where Timothy says, Paul says to Timothy, God has not given you a spirit of fear, but of power and strength and love and a sound mind. I had that in here right at this verse where I could read it. But anyway, that verse applies in so many ways and helps us realize we need not fear. I think there's just a certain amount of fear keeps us safe.
Yes.
We need to but not be overcome by fear.
Right.
And the way that verse helped me in Kenya was driving on the other side of the street.
Oh, yeah.
To me, it was, I should say, point this way on the other side of the street. To sit in the right-hand side of the car with the steering wheel in front of you and drive on the left was quite intimidating to me at first. And actually, after we'd been there for a year or so, Jim gave me a refresher course in driving. And this is from one of the school principals in Nairobi. He said, Louise, you need to go out and drive on Sunday mornings. Either you drive for an hour before church or else an hour after church, just to practice driving and getting used to it when there's not much traffic around. Because of course Sunday morning is when the traffic is the lightest. And so that verse gave me courage, driving different places even without Jim, by myself, driving other people and so on.
Yeah, you probably needed to be able to drive. You never know, as long as you had access to a vehicle, which I guess you did.
Yeah.
I remember visiting some missionary friends of ours who lived in Indonesia, and they also drive on the wrong side of the street.
The other side.
Right. And the day we got there, Tom, the husband, said, the first thing we have to do this evening is go to the eye doctor because I may have a detached retina.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And he was really concerned about his ability to see. And then, if they had to do anything, whether he would be able to drive home. And for some reason, it sort of seemed like it was being left to me that I might have to drive in a country I'd never been to before, on roads that were not the best, and have to drive on the left side of the street. I was really, really glad when the doctor said, no, you don't have a detached retina, you're going to be okay, and he was able to drive home.
Oh, what a relief.
It was a real relief, yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't have that verse in my hip pocket at the time, or I would have had to pull it out and say, God, please help me to not fear here. So, well, Louise, thanks so much for joining me today in our View from the Pew. I hope folks got to know you a little bit more and understand a little bit more about who you are and why the scriptures are so important to you.
Absolutely. It's good to be here. Thank you, Larry.
All right.